Most of us spend our lives exhausted, constantly chasing higher incomes and stressing over complex financial strategies, only to feel like we never have enough compared to everyone else. We mistakenly believe that financial success requires a high-paying job, elite mathematical intelligence, or discovering the perfect formula to beat the stock market. In The Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel reveals the liberating truth. Managing money successfully is not a hard science, but a soft skill where how you behave matters much more than what you know. You will discover how mastering your emotions, leveraging the silent power of compounding, and redefining wealth as having full control over your time can make you financially unbreakable. Click and listen now to uncover the counterintuitive behavioral secrets that ordinary people use to build extraordinary wealth and secure lasting financial freedom.
I'm really excited to get into this one. It's a pleasure to be here. This book is just fascinating because it completely dismantles this massive pedestal we usually put finance on.
Yeah, it really does.
We treat money like it's physics, right? Like there are these strict laws and formulas that if you just memorize them, you're guaranteed results. But the whole premise here is that finance is actually, well, it's closer to psychology. It's a soft skill.
It's interesting you call it a soft skill because, in the corporate world, soft skills are usually dismissed as kind of the easy stuff,
Right.
like communication or empathy. But the author opens with this comparison that suggests this soft skill is actually the only thing that really matters. He contrasts a regular janitor with this high-level finance executive.
Oh, yeah, the story of Ronald Reed and Richard Fuscone.
Yeah.
This is, it's the perfect anchor for the whole discussion today. So Ronald Reed was a janitor and a gas station attendant up in Vermont. He lived a very quiet life, chopped his own firewood, and he died at 92.
Okay.
But when he died, he left an estate worth over $8 million to his stepkids and the local library and hospital.
Which, just on the surface, that sounds completely impossible. A janitor's salary doesn't just mathematically lead to $8 million without some kind of lottery win or a hidden inheritance.
Exactly, but that's the thing. There was absolutely no secret windfall here. He literally just saved what he could. He bought blue chip stocks, so essentially just boring, stable companies. And he waited. He just let compounding do the heavy lifting for decades.
Just decades of patience.
Right. Now, you compare that to Richard Fuscone. This guy has a Harvard MBA. He's a Merrill Lynch executive, retired in his 40s to become a philanthropist.
Mm-hmm.
In the traditional finance world, Fuscone is the ultimate expert, right? And Reed is just the amateur.
And Fuscone had the exact pedigree that we're constantly told leads to wealth, but the outcome was basically the exact inverse.
Completely the inverse. So Fuscone borrowed heavily to expand this massive 18,000 square foot mansion. It had 2 elevators, 2 swimming pools, and then the 2008 financial crisis hit, and he was completely over-leveraged.
Oh.
Yeah, he had high debt and illiquid assets, meaning he just couldn't sell things fast enough to pay his bills. He went completely bankrupt. The expert was totally wiped out because of greed and impatience, while the janitor became a multimillionaire through patience and discipline.
It's such a stark contrast. But does this mean education is just irrelevant? Or is it that finance is uniquely different because behavior trumps intelligence? Because, you don't see a janitor accidentally performing better heart surgery than a Harvard-trained doctor.
That's exactly it. Medicine is a hard science.
Yeah.
Architecture is a hard science. If you don't know the exact technicals, the bridge collapses or the patient dies.
Hmm.
But in money, a highly disciplined amateur can absolutely outperform an impulsive expert.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And that's why the book says doing well with money has a little to do with how smart you are and everything to do with how you behave.
Well, let's dig into that behavior a bit. Because usually when we see people making what look like bad financial decisions like buying lottery tickets or taking out payday loans, we immediately judge them. We think they're being totally irrational. But the first lesson we're pulling from this is that no one is crazy.
This is so crucial for listeners to understand. We all like to think we make our decisions based on cold, hard spreadsheets and logic.
Mm-hmm.
But the argument here is that our personal experiences with money make up about, 0.000000001% of what's actually happened in the world, yet they make up 80% of how we think the world works.
We're basically anchored to our own narrow history.
We are.
So, if I grew up during a massive economic boom, I'm wired totally differently than someone who grew up during a severe bust.
Precisely. Let's take the stock market. Say you were born in 1970. The S&P 500 increased nearly tenfold during your teens and 20s. So your formative years basically taught you that the market is this unstoppable wealth-generating machine.
Right, it just goes up.
Yeah. But if you were born in 1950, the market went literally nowhere during those exact same formative years. Adjusted for inflation, you actually lost money.
So the person from 1950 isn't being dumb by avoiding stocks. They're just reacting accurately to the reality they live through.
Correct. Neither person is crazy. They're just operating on completely different data sets.
Yeah.
And this applies perfectly to that lottery ticket example you just brought up.
Oh, right, because that always seems so irrational.
It does. The lowest income households spend the most on lottery tickets. To you or me, looking at a spreadsheet, that looks like terrible math. Why spend $400 a year on a 1 in a million shot when you can't even afford basic emergencies?
Right. I mean, that money could literally be your emergency fund.
Logically, yes.
Mm.
But think about it from their shoes. If you can't afford a vacation or a new car or a nice house, and you genuinely feel like you never will, that lottery ticket is basically the only way to buy the feeling of hope.
Buying hope.
Exactly. It's their only access to a dream that wealthy people just take for granted. It's not good math, but it's entirely understandable psychology.
That completely reframes it from stupidity to, I guess, desperation, or at least a very different utility for that money.
Yeah, it's a different mental model.
But while we're on the subject of things totally out of our control, we really have to talk about the role of luck. We love to build these cultural narratives that success is purely about hard work, but this brings us to lesson 2, where luck and risk are basically siblings.
They are two sides of the exact same coin. We generally accept that risk exists, right? We know you can make great decisions and still get a terrible result, but we have a really hard time accepting the inverse, that you can make mediocre decisions and get an amazing result purely because of luck.
It hurts the ego.
It does. The example of Bill Gates in the book is fascinating here. Gates is obviously brilliant and incredibly hardworking. Nobody denies that. But he also happened to attend Lakeside School.
Which was basically the only high school in the entire world with a computer at that time, right?
Practically, yes. In 1968, most college universities didn't even have a computer. But Lakeside did. The odds of a high school student having access to a computer at that exact moment in history were roughly 1 in a million. If Gates goes to literally any other high school, there is no Microsoft. That is pure luck.
But then the author introduces this counterpoint that I just found really tragic, the story of his friend, Ken Evans.
Yeah, Kent Evans, he was Gates's best friend at Lakeside. Gates himself said Kent was the smartest student in the class, equally ambitious, and they had these grand plans to conquer the world together. But before they even graduated high school, Kent died in a mountaineering accident.
Oh, man. So it's 1 in a million luck for Gates to be at the school, and then a 1 in a million risk for Evans on the mountain.
Exactly. Same exact potential, same drive, completely opposite tail events. The lesson here isn't to just dismiss all success as just luck, but to be very careful when judging it. Nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems.
Because if you try to copy exactly what a billionaire did, step by step, you might fail simply because you can't replicate their luck.
Exactly. You can't engineer luck.
Which really suggests we should focus on broad patterns, things like saving and patience, rather than trying to replicate these highly specific hero stories. And speaking of broad patterns, arguably the most powerful one we need to talk about is compounding.
Oh, absolutely.
We all know the basic math, 8 times 8 times 8, but the argument here is that we just don't get it intuitively.
We really don't. Humans think linearly. But compounding is exponential. The human brain literally just shorts out when it tries to grasp it over long periods. The classic example he uses is the ice ages.
Wait, I always thought the ice ages were caused by these massive shifts in the Earth's temperature or orbit.
Oh, that's what logic would dictate, right?
Mm-hmm.
A huge result needs a huge cause. But geological theory suggests it's actually caused by moderately cool summers.
Just moderately cool.
Yeah. The summer just isn't quite hot enough to melt the previous winter's snow. So that little bit of leftover ice reflects more sunlight, which causes the next winter to be just a tiny bit colder and the next summer to be slightly cooler. It's this tiny, invisible feedback loop. But if you run that over 10,000 years, it literally covers the entire continent in miles of ice.
So it's not about the intensity of the event at all. It's purely about the lack of interruption.
That is the perfect way to phrase it, and that is Warren Buffett's actual secret. I mean, there are over 2,000 books about how Buffett picks stocks, but very few of them focus on the fact that he's been investing for 3/4 of a century.
Yeah, the timeline is insane.
His net worth is roughly $84.5 billion, but $81.5 billion of that came after his 65th birthday.
That statistic just always blows my mind. If he had retired at 60 like a normal person, he'd just be some obscure, mildly rich guy in Omaha.
He would have a net worth of maybe $11 million, which is respectable, but nobody would know his name. His skill is definitely investing, but his secret weapon is time. And this leads us directly into a critical distinction the book makes: getting wealthy versus staying wealthy.
They sound like exactly the same thing to most people, but they are treated as totally different skill sets here.
They're actually opposing skill sets. Getting wealthy requires optimism. You have to take risks, you have to put yourself out there, you have to believe the future will be better. But staying wealthy, that requires paranoia.
Paranoia.
Yeah, a total survival mindset. You have to constantly fear that what you made can be taken away from you.
Because if you get wiped out, the clock on compounding just stops.
Right. You can't compound if you go to zero. This is why survival is the single most important financial strategy. You don't need the highest returns in the world. You just need decent returns that you can sustain for the longest possible period of time without getting forced out of the game.
This idea of survival connects really well to the concept of tails, which is lesson 6. The idea that tails drive everything. Can you unpack the portfolio theory behind this? Because I think a lot of listeners assume you need to be right like 90% of the time to actually make money in the market.
That is probably the biggest misconception in all of finance. In reality, you can be wrong half the time, or honestly even more than half the time, and still make an absolute fortune. A tail event is just a statistical outlier that has a massive, massive impact.
Like the Snow White example he brings up.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So in the 1930s, Disney produced about 400 cartoons. Most of them lost money. The studio was completely drowning in debt. But then they released Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
The game changer.
It changed everything. That one single movie earned $8 million in 1938 dollars. It paid off all their debt, bought the studio complex, and basically financed the next entire decade of films. One single tail event paid for hundreds of failures.
And this applies directly to our investment portfolios, too.
It applies even more there. Look at the Russell 3000 index. Since 1980, 40% of the companies in that index have effectively failed. They lost 75% of their value or more. But the index itself returned something like 73-fold over that time.
Wait, how does the index go up that much if 40% of the companies inside it are failing?
Because of the tails. The top 7% of companies perform so incredibly well. We're talking your Apples, Amazons, Microsofts, that they more than offset the thousands of absolute duds.
This is a really strong argument for just buying index funds, isn't it? Because if I sit there and try to pick individual stocks, I might totally miss the Amazon or the Apple.
That's the real danger. If you miss those few tail events, your overall returns essentially go to zero. By just buying the broad index, you mathematically guarantee that you own the winners, even if it means you also have to own the losers. You accept the duds so you can catch the tails.
But catching those tails kind of creates a completely new problem for us. Because if you actually hit a winner, or even if you just work hard and accumulate some money, your lifestyle tends to creep up. You start wanting the next big thing. Which brings us to lesson 3, the difficulty of learning to say enough.
This is arguably the hardest lesson of all. The goalpost just keeps moving on us. He tells the story of Rajat Gupta. This guy was a wildly successful CEO, worth about $100 million.
Which is definitely enough by any normal standard.
By any standard, but he hung out with billionaires. So he looked around and suddenly felt poor compared to his peers. To close that gap, he engaged in insider trading to make even more money. He got caught and he went to federal prison.
He literally risked what he had and needed for what he didn't have and didn't need.
That's the tragedy of it. There was absolutely no logic there. It's pure, unchecked psychology. If you cannot stop your own internal goalpost from moving, you will eventually take a risk that ruins you.
But why do we even do it? Like, why do we feel the need for 100 million if we already have 10 million? Is it just to show off to other people? Which I guess brings us right to lesson 8, the man in the car paradox.
It's largely about status, yeah.
Yeah.
But the paradox is so funny because we buy these expensive things to get respect from others. But the things don't actually get us the respect we think they do.
How so?
Well, think about when you see a guy in a bright red Ferrari drive by. You don't look at him and think, wow, that guy is impressive. You look at the car and think, wow, if I had that car, people would think I'm impressive.
You completely bypass the actual driver.
Exactly. You are just using their car to fantasize about your own status.
Yeah.
So the driver is getting zero actual admiration from you. He's just a prop in your daydream. The real point here is that humility, Kindness and empathy will bring you so much more respect than horsepower ever will.
That is so true. And it leads beautifully into his definition of wealth, which I found to be a massive paradigm shift. He distinguishes between being rich and being wealthy. Lesson 9.
Yes. Being rich is basically current income. It's highly visible. It's the peacock feathers. You know someone is rich because they're actively spending money in front of you, driving the $100,000 car, wearing the watch.
Right, it's performative.
But wealth is hidden.
Mm.
Wealth is income that is not spent. It's the nice car they decided not to purchase. It's the first-class ticket they declined so they could save the difference.
So wealth is basically just unspent options.
Precisely. And that makes it incredibly hard to imitate. We are social creatures. We learn by observation. I can see your fancy car and try to buy it to match you, but I can't see your savings account, so I can't model that good behavior easily. But that unspent money, those hidden options, that is what actually buys you freedom.
And freedom is the core of Lesson 7. Wealth is controlling your time.
Ultimately, the ability to wake up every single morning and say, I can do whatever I want today, is the absolute highest dividend money can ever pay. It correlates with human happiness so much more strongly than the size of your salary does.
I think a lot of listeners right now probably feel trapped by what they call golden handcuffs. High salary, lots of stuff, but absolutely zero time. So how do we actually get to that level of freedom? The book suggests a strategy that sounds almost too simplistic. Lesson 10. Save just to save.
Normally, financial advisors tell you to save for a specific goal, a down payment on a house, a new car, a wedding. But the author argues you should save for the things you can't possibly predict.
But just playing devil's advocate here for a second, inflation is a very real thing. If I'm just holding cash in a bank account with no specific purpose, isn't it losing purchasing power? Isn't saving just to save highly inefficient?
In a pure Excel spreadsheet, yes, it's mathematically inefficient. But your life isn't a spreadsheet. The real world is full of curveballs, global pandemics, sudden layoffs, random medical emergencies. If you have zero cash savings because you invested absolutely every penny to be perfectly efficient, a single curveball can force you to sell your investments at the exact wrong time.
Like during a market crash. So the cash drag, the loss to inflation, is basically just the price of insurance.
Exactly. It buys you the ability to just say, I can wait. And that ability to wait prevents you from interrupting that compounding process we talked about earlier.
Which perfectly aligns with Lesson 11, aiming to be reasonable instead of strictly rational.
This is genuinely one of my favorite chapters in the whole book. We all try to be these cold, rational optimizers. But we aren't robots. We are highly emotional creatures. The best financial strategy isn't the one that maximizes your returns on paper. It's the one that maximizes your ability to sleep soundly at night.
Like the example of paying off a low-interest mortgage early.
That is the perfect example.
Right.
Mathematically speaking, if your mortgage is at 3% and the stock market returns an average of 8%, you should literally never pay off that mortgage early. You should invest every spare dollar. That is the rational choice.
Right, take the spread.
But if having debt hanging over your head makes you anxious, if it stresses your marriage out, then paying it off is the reasonable choice. And if being totally debt-free gives you the peace of mind to hold on to your other investments during a terrifying market crash, then that supposedly suboptimal choice actually leads to much better long-term financial results.
It's really about minimizing your future regret. Which brings us to Lesson 13, leave room for error. You mentioned earlier that we have to survive in order to compound. How do we practically build that room for error into our lives?
By planning on your plan, not going according to plan.
Okay, I like that.
He uses this great analogy of card counters in blackjack. They actually know the mathematical odds are in their favor. They have an edge, but they still don't bet every single dollar they have on the very next hand.
Because even with an edge, you can still hit a bad run of luck and lose.
Right. And if you bet everything and lose, you are escorted out of the casino. You have zero chips left. You can't play the next hand where the odds might have finally paid off. You have to ensure that no single failure can completely wipe you out. You have to avoid those Russian roulette-style risks where the downside is total ruin, no matter what the potential upside is.
Now, looking forward, I mean, everyone always wants to know what the market will do next year or next decade, but Lesson 12 warns us pretty explicitly, history doesn't dictate the future.
He calls this the historians as prophets fallacy. We love to look at economic data from, say, 1900 to 2000 and try to build a perfect model for 2024. But the most important market-moving events in history, the Great Depression, World War II, 9/11, COVID, they were all massive surprises. They had absolutely no precedent in the historical data.
As he says, things that have never happened before happen all the time.
Exactly. If your financial plan relies on history repeating itself exactly as it did before, your plan is incredibly fragile. You need a plan that prepares you for things that are weirder and wilder than anything we've seen so far.
And it's not just the outside world that changes. We change too, which is lesson 14. You will change.
Psychologists call this the end of history illusion. We all readily acknowledge that we've changed a ton over the last 10 years, but for some reason, we firmly believe our current personality is the final, finished product. And it never is.
So the person I am today at 30 is not who I'll be at 50.
Not at all. You might love the grind and hustle for money right now, but you might crave extreme simplicity and peace later. So you really want to avoid extreme financial planning. Don't live on just rice and beans for a whole decade to retire early, because you might get there and realize you completely wasted your youth. Balance is the true key to endurance.
Finally, before we wrap up, I really want to touch on why it's so incredibly hard to just stay optimistic in finance. Lesson 15 tackles this, the seduction of pessimism. Why does bad news always feel so much more important and urgent than good news?
Because pessimism just sounds more intellectual. It sounds like serious critical thinking. If I sit here and tell you, hey, the stock market will probably double over the next 15 years, I just sound like a naive salesman. But if I say, there is a looming massive debt crisis that will completely crush the dollar next year, I sound really smart. I sound like I'm looking out for your safety.
Optimism sounds risky, but pessimism feels like a safe harbor.
Exactly. But you have to look at the actual mechanism of how change happens in the world. Destruction is incredibly fast. A massive building can burn down in a single hour. The stock market can crash 20% in a day. It physically demands your immediate attention.
Well, growth is just boring.
Growth is the janitor quietly saving money for 50 years. It's the oak tree growing a few inches a year. It's way too slow to ever make the daily news headlines, but over a long enough timeline, that slow compounding progress accumulates and almost always outweighs the fast destruction.
So we really have to fight that biological instinct to panic when the headlines inevitably get scary.
You have to train yourself to view market volatility as a fee, not a fine. If you go to a theme park, you gladly pay $100 for a ticket. You don't get upset about paying it because it's just the cost of admission for the experience. Market volatility, watching your portfolio drop 20% in a bad year, is simply the admission fee for the massive returns you get over decades. If you view that drop as a fine for doing something wrong, you'll panic and quit. But if you view it as a fee, you'll stick it out.
That is just such a remarkably healthy way to frame it. So if we synthesize all of this, all 15 lessons, the psychology of money really isn't about stock-picking algorithms at all. It's ultimately about humility.
It is. It's the humility to accept that luck plays a huge role in your outcomes. The humility to know that you don't actually need to impress strangers with a Ferrari. And the incredible discipline to define what your personal enough actually looks like.
I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought that builds on that idea of enough. We talked a lot about saving, but the author makes a brilliant point that the most powerful way to grow your wealth isn't actually by relentlessly raising your income. It's by raising your humility. If you can truly be happy with less, your savings rate absolutely explodes. And that gap, the space between what you earn and what you spend, is the only financial metric you actually have total control over. It's the ultimate efficiency.
Mastering that gap is the true path to becoming financially unbreakable.
Thank you for watching. May you please like, share, subscribe, follow up in next video.